Hello, survivors. Welcome to the State of Decay 2 stream. I'm your host, Geoffrey, and today's stream topic comes at the request of a viewer named Airy Twitch, who asked me if we could do a stream about the lore of State of Decay. So this is not going to be like a Wikipedia entry with like a bunch of details about the background story of the game. Instead, I'd like to get a few experts in here to talk about how we approached creating the lore of State of Decay, what the process was like, what it's like to work on a long-term franchise with just a lot of different entries in it that take different angles on the lore. So to start off, our first expert is the former lead writer of State of Decay 2, who's now on a different team with me that we're not going to be talking about. Hello, Andy Collins.
Hi, folks.
It's good to have Andy here because he was the one who framed out the dialogue and the text of State of Decay 2. He led the team of writers who created the personalities of all of those characters. And then as time went on, Andy was also responsible for a lot of the other, big lore dumps in the game, especially the Homecoming update. And so it's really great to have Andy here. He's going to have a lot of insights into sort of what that process was like. But reaching even further back, we've also got your favorite person, Brant Fitzgerald. Hello, Brant.
Hello.
It's good to have you back, Brant. So Brant, for those of you who don't know, he's the current art director on State of Decay 2, but before then, he and the original art director, Doug Williams, were the originators of the idea of State of Decay. So if you're thinking about State of Decay lore and, the origins of this IP, if you want to go all the way back, you have to go to Brant and Doug. So thank you for being here, Brant, to sort of help us sort of fill in the blanks.
You're welcome. You guys have no idea now that I'm of advanced age how long it takes in hair and makeup to get me ready for things like this.
So I am going to get started in the actual game here. So before we start our conversation, I just want to figure out what gameplay you're going to be seeing in the background while we chat. So what I've got here, this is one of my personal communities. I've got this character, Dora, who is, she's wearing a shark hoodie outfit. She's got a lot of sort of classic, meaningful weapons on her back that we can sort of mention as we get to the subject matter in our discussion. What I'm going to be doing... Oh, holy crap, there's a ton of freaks around here. What I'm planning to do is take her up to where it all started. I'm going to run her up to Mount Tanner while we are chatting. But yeah, speaking of sort of the beginnings of the game in Mount Tanner, Brant, you've been associated with this IP far longer than anyone, particularly longer than me and Andy, who were both hired after State of Decay 1 came out. And so I'd love to just start there. Like, you were there for the creation of Marcus, Maya, and Ed, that whole thing. I mean, you were not the writer, but you were right there for all of it. I'm curious, like, what was that process like? What were the considerations people made when they were figuring out what kind of story you're going to be telling with State of Decay 1?
Well, it was, there was just a few of us, so everybody was in on it, collaborating on who we wanted to tell the stories about, who we wanted to be your sort of introduction to the players and things like that. Marcus, being sort of the strong, reasonable type, and we wanted, and I don't know, it was just a group effort where we were all talking about what we wanted to play or what we wanted to see in the game. And one of the big things was we don't have we're very representative in State of Decay, and so we wanted to start off by saying, we weren't gonna go soft on this. We just wanted you to start off with a wide variety of players, including, we didn't pick an African American as your starting player for any reason other than it's going to happen any number of times where you're going to be picking a survivor that is somebody different than you might normally play with. So it wasn't a political statement on our point or on our part, but it was just, we wanted this great set of strong players, and each one of those starting players, Maya, Ed, and Marcus, all have really strong personalities, and it was a lot of fun to tell their stories.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I really appreciated about State of Decay 2, or just State of Decay as an IP, as I was brought in to work on it, was the fact that it was very committed to the idea that players should feel like they're playing an every person. Like you're not playing like superheroes. You're not playing like weird super soldiers or anything like that. You're just playing common people, and so and the game is really committed to making sure it represents a wide range of just normal people. And that category, normal people, includes everyone. Everyone who exists in real life is to some degree or another a normal person. And so this game like really reaches out and tries to represent a wide variety of different perspectives, different backgrounds, because that's who would be here in the apocalypse, and we want that to feel real.
Yeah, that was it. When we were first coming up with the idea to pitch a game, we unanimously, the three of us, there was Doug Williams, myself, and a guy named Trevor, who decided to stay at the company he was at the time. But we said it has to be the people you meet every day. So it was the plumber, right? It was the guy that you hired to do work on your car. It was every person. So that was maybe the most important thing that we decided when we first started out. It had to be quote unquote normal people.
Yeah, and actually, when we actually do start introducing like badass Delta Force type soldiers and things like that, they're the weirdos who stand out. Sasquatch is the weirdo that doesn't fit in with anyone else because he's the typical video game hero. And like that kind of person is strange and uncomfortable in a world like this.
Well, and it is zombie canon, so we had to sprinkle in some of those. And when you and Andy came on, you were 100% bought into that because it made for some really interesting situations instead of your normal, I'm a badass soldier of fortune, and I've been preparing for this for decades. While we have that in the game, we have some of those characters. I think it was I remember both of you guys being excited about being able to tell stories of normal people in completely abnormal situations. So I'll leave it at that.
So this setting here, I mean, I'm right here in Mount Tanner at the ranger station, which is pretty close to like where the game originally starts, and I'm sort of wondering, like, the setting of Trumbull Valley. We keep coming back to it throughout, at various stages in the lore. We keep coming back to this place. What is it about this place that stood out as like this is the world we want to create to set our story within?
Well, it started as our desire to tell stories in rural America. Part of that was because it made for some plausibility in being able to survive the initial stages of our zombie apocalypse. You don't have the dense town populations that would pretty much wipe out everybody, given that situation. But also, we keep coming back to Trumbull because it feels like home for the franchise. And I'll let Andy go into a little bit more, but over the years, we've kind of kept hinting that Trumbull Valley is special in the lore of this place as well, for one reason or another. So it's not only home for the game, but I think it's home for a lot more of our, franchise identity. But I'll let Andy go a little bit into what he's done to advance that since he came on.
For me, Trumbull is the place where the story of the State of Decay franchise happens. Right? State of Decay 2 introduces 3 new maps, and they're all gorgeous. They're wonderful places to explore. We specifically created them to be replayable over and over without a specific fixed storyline. Whereas the original game in State of Decay 1 and Trumbull Valley had a very specific storyline that you walked through. There were side little side jaunts you could go on, but there was a set group of characters that composed the core of your community, and you followed the lives of those characters as they attempted to escape Trumbull. So when we made the decision to revisit more story-focused content in State of Decay 2 with the Heartland and then later the Homecoming expansions, Trumbull was just the natural place for us to put those stories, right? So for me, that's why it was a no-brainer to come back to Trumbull along the way, because it would not have felt right to tell the story of State of Decay anywhere else, particularly on any of our more I call them generic maps. Not that they're unexciting or
Yeah.
uninteresting, but that they're not story focused maps.
I was so excited when the decision was made to come back to Trumbull, because then I didn't have to learn a new map. I've been playing versions of this map for almost 15 years now, in one form or another. So
It does become muscle memory, some of these roads,
yeah,
which is what makes it more exciting when the world artists throw in little curveballs here and there, like, oh, that bridge doesn't exist anymore. Okay, I've got to relearn, got to remap my brain to these new directions.
So one of the most consistent characters that we've had in the game, from the very beginning, and who's really lasted throughout the franchise, as different characters have sort of moved in and out of the story, is Lily Ritter. And so I wonder, she was basically sort of almost the narrator of the story to some degree, because she was sort of the consistent voice you always heard over the radio. Brant, is there anything you want to say about just sort of like who Lily was, like why she worked so well as sort of almost a perspective character on what was going on in this world?
well, I mean, Lily, like you said before, Lily was the voice of the narrator, really, because she was constantly on the radio in the first SOD, and to the point where I remember during development we had a bug where she would be on the radio every 2 seconds, and we had to tone her down. But
I'm sure there are some players who say that was also a bug that we shipped with.
Probably. I mean, I know there was still a lot of Lily, right?
Yeah.
But she was there because this is her home, and so there was no better person to sort of have evolve through the different variations of Trumbull Valley. There was no better person than the original storyteller, really.
Yeah, and I think that Lily herself, there were some people who treated her almost like what's the name of the character in Fallout 4 who's just always sending you missions, and people get really, really resentful of him, like Preston or something like that, folks who sort of viewed her that way. But that was not a problem with Lily as a character. That was a problem with sort of like the fact that basically she was this one voice that we could use for all of the mission content of the game. It kind of helped keep costs down because we had one voice who could sort of narrate all of that stuff. But Lily as a character, even though there were some players who sort of considered her annoying because she was the voice of the game reminding them to do things, she as a character, for me, I've always just really, really liked her because she was somebody who, in the original world, she had this long-term, disease that she needed to manage. She was at a disadvantage in a lot of ways, but her life probably felt fairly constrained before the apocalypse. But then, once the apocalypse happened, her determination and her, sort of belief in humanity and sort of faith that you could survive this, you could build something better, ends up, making her stand out and shine as being sort of a leader in this world. And so that's sort of, as we were developing, State of Decay 2's lore, and we were thinking we wanted to create, who are the factions of the future. In State of Decay 1, we see the older sort of authority structures of the game breaking down, right? We had the law represented by, Judge Lawton, who was running things into the ground and doing a terrible job. We had the military represented by, Diane Montresor and Doghouse, who were running things into the ground and ruining everything. We had all of these older power structures, even like criminal stuff, like Joe Wilkerson. Also, he was running things and things didn't go great for him either. And it's like all of these old power structures are collapsing, and we get to decide who are the new people who are running things in Decay 2. And one of the first people we decided to go to was Lily. We're sort of planning the factions. We wanted to make Lily in charge of one of them because she represented this sense of hope and optimism and, defiance in the face of adversity, which, that's something she had grown up with her entire life, with her, degenerative disease and everything. She's used to optimism in the face of despair. And she was able to be the new voice of authority in the apocalypse. And I love that for her. I feel like that says something about sort of the themes of State of Decay.
She's definitely a core character who just buckles down and gets stuff done, right? Like, she sees things falling apart, so, well, I'm going to bring a community of people together to help fix this. She doesn't complain about it. She just says, okay, stuff's got to be done, let's do it.
Really quickly, Geoffrey, they're saying that your audio is really low.
Dang it. Okay, yeah,
because-
sorry. There's this weird thing. We're using Google Meet right now to bring us together onto the stream, and unfortunately, Google Meet has got this feature where it will lower the audio of somebody who talks loud automatically at a system level, and so I can't keep the balance. I have to constantly pay attention to the balance. So I'm really sorry about that. We tried to use Discord to try to correct that, and unfortunately, we ran into some technical difficulties, and it wasn't working. So I'm going to keep trying. Thank you. Please tell me if my audio gets low again. I'm going to try to keep correcting it as that happens. Oh no, I'm in trouble. So, we had a few questions that I gathered from social media about the original State of Decay. La Coalición wants to know, there's a plane crash. In fact, maybe I should go find that plane crash. It's like around here somewhere. Yeah, so he wants to know, like, did that plane crash happen before the outbreak or after the outbreak? And his guess is that it happened after the outbreak or as part of the outbreak, because there's no emergency vehicles around it. There's no response. It just crashed. What do you guys think about that? What was our attitude going into that plane crash?
So the original timeline for the first game was a couple weeks had passed since Ed and Marcus had gone off and gone on their long camping trip. And so that plane crash happened sometime after the initial zombies started showing up, because there's no, NTSB set up there, and they're not gathering all of the stuff. It definitely happened after other things were happening to cause, your typical power structures to not pay attention to something like a passenger liner plane crash.
Right. There's a reason. We're not the only piece of media to use this sort of visual symbol of civilization collapsing, right? It's with just that image, you're communicating an immense amount of information about the story of the world, right? That a plane full of people could fall out of the sky, that's a big deal, but that nothing was done about it, right?
Yeah.
Like, that's an unthinkable event to us. But that sort of thing is a powerful shorthand in any sort of post-apocalyptic fiction for this is what would happen when all of the systems were used to disappear.
And that's a really good point, Andy, where the symbolism of a plane falling out of the sky, any of those modern disaster movies inevitably has at least one jumbo jet, crashing into the ground somewhere.
And I know we've had a lot of questions about what that plane might have carried.
Yeah.
Whether that's relevant to the story of State of Decay.
Yeah, La Coalition was specifically asking about the Dantron crate and why it has a nuclear hazard symbol on it and whether that's meaningful. The Dantron crate was, do you want to talk a little bit about that, Brant? Because it's not really meant to be a huge part of our lore. It's more of an Easter egg. And you want to talk a little bit about sort of our philosophy with Easter eggs and why, where the Dantron crate came from, where a lot of our Easter eggs come from in this game?
Yeah. It's so many of our Easter eggs are sort of our homages to our fans. And Dantron, there was the day Jeff announced the formation of a studio to create State of Decay, there was a forum that was created in the UK, MMOZ is what they called it. And one of the very first people to join MMOZ was this guy named Dantron, and he role played from day one and has never broken character as a robot from the future. And all of his interactions on message boards are as this robot. And so and he was very supportive of the game even before anybody even even before we knew what it was going to be. He was on board. And so we would joke around that maybe Dantron was a robot who came back to warn us about this inevitable future. And so I thought it was funny to throw Dantron's cage in the plane crash, because then that's a red herring to what could have possibly caused the zombie apocalypse, which of course we never reveal the specifics because we don't want to. But and honestly, it's not material to the stories we're trying to tell. It's unimportant as to like the science behind whatever it is that's causing the zombie. And I think it gives us, and Andy, correct me if I'm wrong, but it gives us a little bit more leeway when we're telling our stories. And, you know, every story you tell is from a perspective of somebody who has their own opinions, might be whack job, might not be. And just like, you know, a modern day news cycle, you can find every explanation under the sun for something that happens in the world nowadays, and you don't know who to believe.
Yeah, so we got a question in the chat. Awesome Twisted wants to know if the crashed plane in the background of The Last of Us, if that was a State of Decay reference. And I think that the point that Andy was making is that it doesn't have to be. It's like, you know, that plane it's a symbol that lots and lots of apocalyptic fiction is used to make the point. So no, The Last of Us is, I don't think they're making a specific reference to us any more than we were making a specific reference to any of the 900 other apocalyptic things that showed a crashed jet. That's just, it's a shared language we're all using. It's how we tell that we're sort of in the same place, you know?
I think it's part of zombie apocalypse canon, not just zombie apocalypse, but apocalypse canon is shit has to be going really, really bad if planes are falling out of the sky, which is what it is, you know, before.
So, our very first expansion that we did to State of Decay was Breakdown. And that was actually, it was interesting because Breakdown, you know, we were talking about building the lore of State of Decay. Breakdown was almost a vacation from the lore of State of Decay because it was such a story-light experience. The only thing we really added to the lore of State of Decay with Breakdown was just a collection of like fan favorite characters. You know, people like Amelia Krasman and Walter DeGrasse. But even in those cases, Amelia and Walter were popular not because of a story that we were telling about them, because we didn't tell any particular story about them. They were just popular because they had special powers people liked. Amelia was a particularly good fighter, and Walter DeGrasse was immune to bloater clouds. And so people liked that stuff, but really, Breakdown was us sort of stepping aside and saying, you know what, we're not building lore for right now. We're just, let's make the arcade version of the game. And just sort of leave that stuff off. So really, we didn't continue working on lore until we got over to Lifeline. And then Lifeline was the one where we started actually continuing to expand the world. And that started a little bit like you know, there was a few different seeds of the idea of Lifeline. But the first thing we started building was, you know, James McMillan, he didn't have much to do on Breakdown. He was our, you know, environment artist. He just moved right on to, you know, people had talked about the town of Danforth being the nearest town over off in the distance. He just started building Danforth. He had an idea in his head, like, we're going to build this city that's got a city in the center, but the player can never go in the city because we couldn't afford to make the city work. And so it's just, it's this beltway around a city, and you can go to all the little, like, small outskirtsy type areas around the city and feel like you're doing this in an urban setting without us having to actually take on an urban setting. But that gave us this freedom because we're like, okay, if you're wondering what's happening outside in the world outside Trumbull Valley, how much worse is it getting outside of this rural area? This was our chance to sort of show it.
Right. It was the first time that we officially ventured outside the valley to see what was going on. We had hinted through some various character dialogue about this, but this was the first time we were like, no, see, look, it's happening here too.
Yeah, and one thing, I mean, it's interesting how, you know, building lore in a game like this, a lot of it is about the explicit storytelling. Like for instance, like, you know, Andy, I think for Lifeline, you wrote a whole bunch of, was it notes or dialogue that sort of revealed what was going on in various places of the world that fans actually combined? Yeah.
There were some notes and some journal entries that you could stumble across if you poked around that hinted at similar apocalyptic events in various cities and countries around the world. Again, trying to drive forward the idea that this is not just a local event. This is happening everywhere. And you know, as a writer, it's always pleasing to see folks grab onto stuff that you wrote and try to make sense out of it. Yeah. Like, okay, this is a timeline. Let me assemble this. So that was fun.
Yeah, in our old forums, there was a whole thread where people basically had put together the entire timeline based on all the notes that Andy left lying around, which is really, really fun to build something and then see other people take it further.
Pretty much. I mean, Lifeline was literally the first project I worked on for State of Decay after joining the lab. So that's my earliest work in the franchise is right there.
So it's
still my favorite of all. Just the development process, because there was so few of us, and it was almost like a skunkworks project essentially, where we just got to run wild with with our ideas, and I think it was just a lot of fun to work on.
Yeah. The three of us were practically half the team, which is kind of weird and crazy. But yeah, life like one of the things that we wanted to do with Lifeline was sort of like you said, sort of give people sort of a grander sense of like what was going on in the world, because there were a lot of people who were theorizing that this was just going on in Trumbull Valley. But one of the big kind of messages or like themes in State of Decay is that we're trying to explore, sort of self-reliance, self-determination, the sense that no one is coming to rescue you. What do you do if no one can rescue you? And you probably make different choices. Like, if you're on a desert island and you think that you're going to get rescued any day, you do different things than if you're on a desert island and you think no one is ever going to find you. And so we wanted this to be a story where you're exploring what you do if no one's going to help you. And so Lifeline helped us tell that story, showing you how it's actually worse in other places outside of Trumbull Valley. They're actually considering nuking cities, just abandoning cities, leaving them behind because there's no hope for them. That sets a background tone where, what you're doing in whatever map you're playing in, whatever iteration of State of Decay you're playing in, it says that you're on your own. And that, so like a lot of the lore that we build, it's not just about having interesting little side stories to tell. A lot of those, those stories that you were telling, Andy, about the outside world, you weren't doing it just because you thought people really, really had the question of like, what is going on in Peru? There wasn't all these burning questions. It was more, you're trying to set an overall tone that you're on your own. And so you do that with a lot of details, but then the overall message comes across to the player.
Yeah, I mean, State of Decay was definitely the end result of the philosophy of think globally but act locally.
Yeah.
We actually talked about trying to depict other countries, and we always came back to the fact that we didn't live there, and so we couldn't get the real feeling of a place if we didn't live there. If a majority of the team hadn't lived in that. And you take any small town America, and so many people have had that experience that this feels like home for a lot of people, because it is kind of universal to, where we come from. So,
yeah.
Right. And as I recall, back from my early days of watching online commentary about the game, there were people all over the U.S. claiming that Trumbull Valley was based on their hometown. Right? we had people in the Northwest, we had people in the Midwest, we had people in Colorado and Montana and places like, oh yeah, I know this town. This is pretty much based on town. I've been there, and like they're obviously they're not all correct, but in another way they are, because we tried very hard to draw on some universal elements that make a lot of those places feel similar, that feel and in doing so, it helps Trumbull feel like a real lived-in place. It's not generic.
So while we're talking about the fact that basically, we keep telling sort of these very specific stories in order to kind of get at a larger kind of a larger set of themes, there are still, a lot of players end up with specific questions that we explicitly don't answer in the game. We've got a few coming in from the chat right now that, for instance, Brian Menard wants to know, nuking Danforth, in the canon of State of Decay 2, did that happen or did it not happen? Because Lifeline, for those who don't know, Lifeline had a branching ending. It could actually end one of several different ways, depending on the choices you made, your successes and your failures. It could end with, and one of the endings was the entire city gets nuked after you leave, or the entire city gets nuked with you in it. I think might actually have been an option. I'm not actually sure. I don't remember if that was an option, but in any case, do we actually have canon on that, or we basically is that still undetermined and we haven't gone back yet, if we ever are going to say whether Danforth was nuked? My
general angle when I've been writing additional content for State of Decay is to, in as many places as possible, dodge those answers, right? Like, obviously, in making Lily the leader of the network, we are stating that it is canon that she escaped Trumbull Valley. Like, obviously, in many people's games, that wasn't the case. But we're saying
she couldn't be
did.
killed, but you could decide not to leave Trumbull Valley.
Right. So we're saying Lily escaped. But we haven't really committed to the other characters who were in that original community, and that's very intentional, because we're trying to walk that line between saying yes, the gameplay that you experienced is real, or no, it's not, and sort of the same for Lifeline, right? There's multiple endings there. We've kind of dodged the question of which one is true, so that they can all simultaneously be true.
Yeah.
One exception that we totally cheated on, which was essentially ensuring that Sasquatch is not dead.
Yeah.
He's pretty much supposed to die in Lifeline, and we said no. He's too cool to leave behind. So he even has a line of dialogue at some point in State of Decay 2 talking about his supposed death that was greatly exaggerated. So like something like he's too pretty to die or something like that.
Yeah.
Because Marcus's fate is uncertain, we needed to have a character that Drew Hobson could continually come back and voice for us too.
That's true.
Right. Yeah. Again, for those who are not aware, same actor voiced both Marcus in the original game and Sasquatch in Lifeline, and then later State of Decay 2. So, because we love him.
Geoffrey, they say your
my voice was. I just raised my voice volume again. I'm going to try to lean into my mic a little more too. Sorry about that. I know it's really annoying when the audio on the stream isn't ideal, and I'm going to talk to our IT and figure out what the heck went wrong with Discord, so we can stop having this happen. I really don't like it when the audio levels aren't great. So I'm sorry to the audience for when that happens. So I'm getting a little bit distracted by the zombies here, but
this could be a good segue, and since we're talking about Lifeline, this could be a good segue about the questions about those the factions that we created. And,
yeah, that's a good point.
Lifeline was the first run-in with the idea of Red Talon, and it started out as I was making. I had no intention to make Red Talon as important as it is in State of Decay, but I was filling out the list of companies that the big, what's her name? The big international corporation.
Oh, Weston Allied Industries, yes. Yeah,
Weston Allied Industries, and I was just making up a whole bunch of different companies that they owned, and one of them was an executive protection service or a PMC, and I was I was reading about Blackwater at the time, so I figured I'd better make an ominous, sort of aggressive name for it. And so Red Talon was one that I did a quick Google search and couldn't find an existing PMC that was called Red Talon, so I called it Red Talon. It was only afterwards that we started looking at what kind of factions would grow out of in our world, and Red Talon just happened to be one that was ripe for the picking at that point.
Yeah, the process.
Which honestly is how the best storytelling works, in my opinion. Is if you try to plan too much stuff ahead of time, you build up a mountain of interlocking pieces that can collapse very easily. I find it generally much more interesting when I'm going to tell an ongoing story to plant lots of seeds and see which ones of them want to grow on their own, and then you go, oh, turns out that this is what was important about that seed. You didn't know it at the time, but
yeah.
Well, I love how that progresses into Lily, reinforcing Lily's importance as a character in this world, because she's the one who goes on to found or help found what will be the network.
Yeah,
and we get to visually tell some of that story here in Trumbull Valley as our last map that we produced. Right, so
that's true. In fact, I think I'm not quite
really
in
close.
the right spot. Yeah, I'm really close. Like it's over here. I should go and have a look at that spot because I just to sort of reinforce what Andy was saying, like the process of multiple people over a long period of time and multiple teams over a long period of time, or iterations of a team, building a franchise like this, it's kind of like just very slow improv. It's like we're all yes-anding each other, right? Like somebody does a setup that's interesting, and then somebody else will grab that setup and run with it and do something else with it, and you're sort of handing it from person to person, from team to team, and you're trying to do what you're trying to do when you're working on one particular iteration of the game is come up with interesting enough setups that the next team will want to use it. And so we did that, like Red Talon worked that way, where it's like, basically all I was saying as a designer on Lifeline was we want to have some claimable outposts out there that represent you making contact with mercenaries who can come in and help you out logistically. And Brant needed to put a mercenary label on that, so he was coming up with companies, and he came up with Red Talon. And then I liked Red Talon so much, when I was coming up with, who should the factions in State of Decay 2 be, I jumped on Red Talon again, and we were just sort of passing that back and forth. Same thing with the network, grabbing onto Lily, grabbing onto the history of Trumbull Valley as sort of its origin story. Same with Clio. Actually, Clio is a massive example of that. So getting onto after Lifeline, we made the Year 1 Survival Edition, which was mostly a repackaging of State of Decay 1 with all of its DLC. But we wanted to add a little bit of extra content to it. And so we came up with this idea of this, basically this AI, this logistics AI that was out there, trying to provide supply drops to people, but not knowing, it was not prepared for the zombie apocalypse. It didn't know what to do. So it's just randomly sending people things, trying to figure out how to make itself useful. And, but we put that setup in the Year 1 Survival Edition of this voice named Cleo on the radio who provided you with these mysterious, high-tech supply drops. But we didn't say who it was. We didn't. We left it as a mystery because, while we had all these ideas about who Cleo could be, we wanted to leave it as a setup for us to answer later however we wanted to. I thought of a bunch of lore and a bunch of potential future around Cleo at the time that I was coming up with the Year 1 Survival stuff. What we ended up doing with Cleo, with the homecoming, with the homecoming story and everything, is completely different from that. And I don't care. I love the stuff that Andy came up with, developing the homecoming expansion, and it's better than what I was gonna do. And so, but it's cool. It's like I come up with Cleo, hand it off to Andy. Andy does something else with Cleo. That's awesome, and we just keep handing it back and forth and doing this stuff. It's a great way to build lore. It's a fun way to build lore.
Well, I have to applaud both of you for working with the story that the infinite number of unfinished stories and logic problems that we created in State of Decay, because one, we never thought we were going to make another game, so we just went with what we thought was fun. And so when we handed off the keys to the story to you guys, you did a monumental job in tying up so many loose ends. Cleo was one of them. Cleo was a one-page idea that we worked with prolific zombie author J.L. Bourne for a little while, and one of his ideas was this satellite robot AI that was out there, but it wasn't. He didn't describe it at all. He just introduced it, we like that idea, and I'm glad you guys have developed it to the point where it is, because Cleo feels like a real character in this game, and an incredibly important one. So taking all those ragged threads that we left you and making them into something that intends to live on was a real feat. And so thank you for your efforts on that.
Speaking of taking ragged threads, some of the questions I got on social media while I was preparing for this were about one of my favorite ragged threads, which is the freaks and how the freaks work. I know Beanster asked you, I would love to know more about how the freak zombies came to be. I remember Sasquatch commenting on how strange it is that there only happens to be the same handful of types of zombies. And similarly, a viewer named Zenwa said, I also wanted answers about the freaks and whether they were engineered or if they evolved. And so people have a lot of questions, most of which we're intentionally not answering. But what we did do in Lifeline was we had we did what is called lampshading something, or hanging a lantern on something, which is basically, when you notice there's something that's unexplained in your story that people could treat as some kind of hole or some kind of problem, and you don't want to provide an answer because the answer is secret, or because you don't think any of the answers will necessarily they'll advance the story in a positive way. Something you can do is just hang a lampshade on the mystery and have a character notice that there's something weird in the world. So that's what we did with Sasquatch in Lifeline, is that he notices that it's weird that there's only these 4 types of variant zombies that keep showing up again and again and again. They don't feel like random mutations. It feels like there's some kind of intent behind them. But what is the intent? How do they work? We had Sasquatch ask those questions, but not answer them, because we wanted you to know we recognize those questions. We know that there's holes here, but we don't want to spend our time trying to, that's not what this story is about. We're not going to try to explain how every freak works and why every freak is there and all the details of what's going on with the blood plague under the surface, because that's not what the story is about. The story is about human resilience in the face of adversity and figuring out all the little details. It can be a fun game, but it's not actually the point of the story. It actually could distract from the point of the story if we spent too much time on it. So
it'd be a real downer if Sasquatch actually told the real reason why there's 4 types of freaks, and that it's system resource bound. Right?
Yeah, he's the one who's figured out that they're living in a simulation, and the simulation has got limited memory.
That's exactly it. We can't afford to load too many unique sets of animations.
Connor Hill in the chat, by the way, we've mentioned the origins of Red Talon, where they came from. You know, how, you know, basically with the network, we came up with the network because we wanted to sort of like give Red Talon a foil. Actually, before I go, Connor Hill is asking us about Echo Lab, which we should get into. One thing I wanted to point out, though, is that, you know, we came up with Red Talon and the network to be foils for each other, to be sort of opposed to each other and represent different visions for survival in the apocalypse, but we very deliberately wanted to avoid turning one of them into the Black Hat faction and the other one into the White Hat faction. We wanted it to be possible for players to disagree about which, like, to legitimately disagree and not be wrong about which faction was the better faction. And it's tough because, you know, there's a lot of stories out there who, like, for instance, will take the militaristic faction and make them, you know, sort of like the bad guys, the people for whom, you know, oh, every problem, you know, I'm a hammer and every problem is a nail, you know, or whatever I said that wrong, whatever the saying is, you know, and sort of have the stereotypical militaristic bad guy. But there's also a lot of stories where, you know, the assumption is, oh yeah, the military, or, you know, military type people are these like heroes who are going to come in and do everything right, and they're the superheroes. And both of those are oversimplistic, right? And so we wanted to create a complex faction that had its upsides and its downsides, that could have, you know, a psychopath like Sasquatch in it, but also a hero like Nigel Meredith in it. And both of them, they both believe in the philosophy of Red Talon in different ways for different degrees. But, you know, I definitely would much rather have Nigel show up to save me than Sasquatch in a moment. But neither of them is fully representative of Red Talon, and you can sort of glom onto, you know, whichever one you want. And the network is really similar. You know, like, there's upsides and downsides to the way the network operates.
Andy, you were going to say something?
I was going to say, I don't think, you know, if I got to have somebody rescue me, I'll take Sasquatch. I think he's pretty damn good at what he does. Now, he may decide that today he doesn't care, but
I mean, yeah, maybe he's not the one I want responsible for rescuing me. If he does show up, I'm sure he'll be very effective.
So, to answer the Echo Lab question, now, correct me if I'm wrong, gentlemen, but that came directly out of the events of Lifeline. We looked back at places that we'd told stories, and one of the things we did in Lifeline was they saved a bunch of scientists, and
they being the military, the army saves
the army with the help of the Westons, and because the Westons at the time were providing a lot of the logistics that the military just couldn't do anymore because they were overwhelmed in so many places,
stretched too thin.
And so whatever, you know, where did those scientists go? And one of the ideas was that they formed a cell and the Echo group, and started trying to solve the zombie problem on their own. And those stories start to intertwine with things like Red Talon. And so I think Echo Labs was yet another great example of how we can just keep intertwining these different stories. And it, like you said before, it allows people to formulate these stories in their head, which is the best place to have a story told. You know, having people sort of elaborate their experiences into this, weave that into the story of State of Decay as well. And so Echo Lab was just another one of those things. It's like, we don't tell you much about it, but there is evidence of where it came from, and you know, you got to put it together, because even our people don't know the whole story. So
Echo is also a great outlet for some of the slightly more science fictional elements that we wanted to add to the game over time, as we started introducing slightly weirder tech weapons or biological stuff. Like, oh, well, there's this super secret military science lab working on this stuff. Like, these we tried to keep those things in the sort of realm of, yeah, if you were reading or watching a slightly high-tech military thriller, you might see this sort of stuff. Like, that's the sort of angle we took with them, is they're inventing the bleeding edge technology for use against zombies. With necessity being the mother of invention, you're going to see some rather dramatic advances in that area of science in a relatively small period of time. So they were a nice excuse, lore-wise, for why we're dealing out these things that feel a little high tech and science fictional for the small town universe.
One of my favorite things, of course, I kind of forced it on our development crew, but creating the one Echo Lab in Providence Ridge, and not many people. I mean, I don't know if people noticed or not, but some of the stuff that they had in that Echo Lab were the Clio locator beacons that they had scrounged and had started taking it apart and figuring out stuff. So you have little hints that Echo Lab was trying to scrounge whatever they could as far as tech goes, and Clio was a great place to start doing that. So just little bits of environmental storytelling that will hopefully not screw up our writers too much.
Yeah. Well, one of the things I also appreciate about Echo is the fact that, again, going back to that idea that, the old order of the world has gone away. We had the military in Lifeline that was sort of the same military that we have today, trying to react to a brand new situation that was overwhelming them. But then in the end, our military faction isn't the military. It's this new organization that rose up from its ashes. And actually, the remnants of the military is our science organization. Like, the military did not survive in its original form. Instead, it became something new. It had to become something new in the apocalypse. The military people who survived were not the ones who were trying to fight the zombies using old school methods. It was the people who were studying the zombies and trying to, tackle them on their own new territory, their own new terms. That was the version of the military that survived. Was the people who were thinking outside the box and trying something new. So I really like that aspect of Echo Lab.
I think if this game makes any sort of a statement, politically, socially, whatever, it's that no one idea is the best idea. It's gathering information and ideas from a variety of sources to make it work for you. And it's not like, because like you said, the fall of the military and sort of the traditional power bases were because they had sort of a one-track mind when it came to approaching problem solving. It's not all science. It's not all military application. It's not all social responsibility. It's a mix that will save the most people and work for the most people.
Adaptation being a powerful keyword for us. Is humanity has to adapt its tactics to survive a zombie threat that is itself perhaps adapting a little as well.
So we're getting down to the end, but I think an important question about where lore is going, Andy, is how the plague hearts have evolved and continue to evolve, and their capabilities and things like that.
Yeah.
Do you want to try and approach that?
Sure. The plague hearts themselves were a relatively late addition to the development of State of Decay 2, when we realized that our middle game was missing some compelling drivers. But as we invented this new form of threat, it became a powerful storytelling signal that something is changing, right? Like, I don't think we're trying to say that, oh yeah, plague hearts were always around, you're just only seeing them now. Plague hearts were a new threat on the battlefield with State of Decay 2. They weren't around in the original days of the apocalypse. And the fact that we have continued to evolve them mechanically within the game, like, part of that is just we learn as game designers how to make a better game and how to respond to what the players are looking for. But ideally, when you make a change like that, it should have some narrative reasoning behind it, right? Like the best mechanics have story as to why they exist. So yeah, the plague hearts have changed over the lifespan of State of Decay 2 and continue to change even to this day. Oh, be careful, bloater. And that's not only, like I say, not only is that a conscious mechanical decision, but that's a conscious narrative choice as well, is to say, look, the threat that zombies and now the blood plague are presenting to humanity is not a static threat. It is also changing. It is evolving. It is perhaps adapting to be better at doing what it needs to do.
Which means that our characters also need to adapt and evolve, and they also need to be flexible because yeah, like you said, this is not a static threat. It's going to keep changing, and so the people that survive are going to be the people who can also keep changing.
Yeah, and that's a conscious shift away from a lot of classic, iconic zombie apocalypse stories where once you've got zombies, they're pretty much always the same, and over time they just sort of rot and go away, and they don't really present a new, different threat over time. We felt like that was not the story we wanted to tell. We wanted to tell a story where the player was facing new, monstrous threats over time. So zombies are changing, but that also suggests that something more is at work than a simple one-time event of, oh, there are zombies, and now here's the new world. It's not accidental that the zombie threat is changing to better cope with the solutions that humanity is coming up with. That's very intentional on our part.
Yeah, so Kragan's question about, whether or not sort of the way that we are changing the way that the plague hearts work, is it meant to be like the plague hearts were always this way and we're just retconning, or are we saying that they're changing? It sounds like we're saying that they actually are changing. They're evolving over time.
That's my statement.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I think that's it's a more interesting way for us to approach it. And we've got folks who are asking in the chat, are they a hive mind? Are they, they want to know, like, how do the plague hearts work? And I think we're not going to try to explain it right now, especially not right here. It's an open question that we think it's fun to wonder about. And there's maybe even more possibilities than you might be imagining. Like, for instance, there's a lot of people who are developing, say AIs right now who are, we call them artificial intelligences, and they do a lot of really weird, uncanny things you would normally only expect a human to be able to do. But they're not conscious. They're not sentient. They're just intelligent in a different way. And there's a lot of different ways you can define intelligence. So even if you do decide, oh, I think the plague hearts are a hive mind, even if you say that, that doesn't mean that they're a mind like ours. That they have the same kinds of emotions we have, the same kinds of motivations. That they have the same kind of consciousness that we do. There's a lot of possibilities, and I'm not going to come down on any one particular one in this conversation. But there's a lot of possibilities there, and I think that's one of the things that, like I said, we've been doing, I think, well on this franchise for a long time. Is we open up some questions, we lay down some open questions that could be answered later on. And then we figure out how we want to answer it later and leave ourselves a lot of room to sort of come up with the gameplay that we want in the future, and then build a lot of the lore that we want to build around our needs, so that we're not locking ourselves into something permanent that we have to deliver on. Instead, we're opening questions and then deciding how best to answer them later on, or if to answer them later on.
Yep. I mean, let's be honest here. We made the first two iterations of this game not thinking we'd ever make another one. So the ability to continue to support State of Decay 2 has given us a unique opportunity in our experience to really fill in a lot of the blanks and add more questions and add more interesting volume to the world, not just map wise, but the work that Andy's and Joe did with, like, in the most recent, with some of the notes that were left by the military and in Trumbull Valley. Just a lot of opportunity for us to continue to develop this thing that is now becoming something fairly big in I mean, it's certainly in our world, right? I mean, it's State of Decay. I want to live there, and I have been for a very long time. And I'm always delighted and surprised by sort of the new angles that that the team comes up with. So
we're starting to run out of time, and we have barely gotten to a fraction of the questions that have come in, both on social media prior to this and during the chat. And Andy had a good idea that he mentioned in our Slack channel, which is we should collect these questions and we should do another stream later on where we start tackling even more of those questions and try to get into more of the details. And in many cases, you know, the answer is just going to be, we haven't, you know, here's our thoughts on it, but we haven't officially given you an answer to that question. You'll hear that a lot, but I think we should probably, I mean, we've got so many avid questions coming in from people in the chat. I'd love to be able to get to them all.
There's also still a lot to be talked about why we made the decisions we did, right? Not necessarily here's the secrets behind it, but there are questions about like how did you create the tutorial characters for State of Decay 2? Like that's an interesting topic I could talk about for a few minutes. Talking about the character array we built for Heartland. And then how did we use those characters again in Homecoming? How did we decide which characters to bring over, which characters to leave behind?
Yeah, the evolution
those two storylines are kind of inextricably intertwined. What was the significance of bringing a Wilkerson back for yet another round?
Yeah, totally. And like just like the three very different roles that Ray Santos played in different stories that he showed up in at every stage along the way.
Oh, and to answer the question, yes. What happened to Ray Santos is my fault.
It's his fault. It's funny about Ray Santos is because if we shipped the first game with just under half of the story plot lines that we had intended to make, and Ray Santos's would have turned him into an absolute villain if we would have followed that through. But his was one that was cut. So Ray had a chance at redemption before he even, before any of us knew he was a villain.
Okay, so I think we've got a plan. So basically, a month from today, let's come back. Let's keep these questions. Let's answer more of these questions and make sure, because I mean, we don't want to just we had the conversation we had, but I would love to just continue talking about this. But I can't hold on to all these people for another hour, so we'll do it a little bit later. I'll answer one last question though. Paroxicus asked, why are so many characters in the game named William Peter? And that's entirely because I was just spitballing nicknames that I wanted to give characters, and of course there is an item in the game called a Willy Pete grenade, and I thought that it would be fun to have somebody whose nickname was Willy Pete, and so I put William Peter in there, but only a small percentage of William Peters get the nickname Willy Pete, and the rest of them you're just like, wow, why is this pair of names so popular? That's why. So there you go, Paroxicus. There's your answer. We will answer more weird questions like that a month from now. In the meantime, let me say goodbye to each of our illustrious guests. Andy Collins, thank you for coming in, and thank you for suggesting that we come back in a month, because I think that'll be a great stream. It was good to hear your answers today. It'll be good to hear more answers from you in the future.
It's been a pleasure, Geoffrey, as always.
And Brant, thank you for coming up with this idea so that I would have my dream job later on. I know you were thinking of me the entire time. I really appreciate it.
I was.
So,
yes, before I even knew you, Geoffrey, I wanted to make a game that you could work on forever.
All right, and with that, we're going to wrap this up. So the next stream is going to be on February 20th. That's going to be Joe Swarner talking more about the Infestation update and what's coming and what has sort of changed as we've developed it over time. So look forward to that. And then I believe March 6th is the next time I'm hosting a stream. And when we do that, I'll bring these same guys back. We'll continue talking about State of Decay's lore, and we're going to record all the questions that we saved here in Slack. I'm going to put them in a document. We'll hold on to them, and we'll keep answering your questions later on. Thank you all so much for being here, for participating. We really want to make sure we get to all this stuff. So thank you, and goodbye. After 20 seconds of garbage on the screen. Here you go. Click some links.
20 seconds. Smash that like button.
No, ring that bell. Ding the bell. Feed the Tyrannosaurus.
That's a big dinosaur.